Okay, looks like we are live. We'll let some folks come in the next minute or so, and then we'll begin with some introductions after that. But thank you guys all for joining today.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah. All right, we can start to kick it off here. So first, let's just do some basic introductions. I'm Kate, Communications at Open Forest Protocol. I'll be moderating today, but these are the real stars of the show. So whoever wants to kick it off next, feel free to introduce yourself.
I can go. Ladies first, right? I'm Anna Lerner. I am the CEO of Climate Collective, which is an innovation network of climate tech companies working on climate change with the use and using digital technologies to try to address some of the challenges and the opportunities we're seeing in climate.
Amazing.
Yeah, hey, I'm Osho. I'm one of the founders of dClimate, and I serve as its CEO. dClimate is an open ecosystem for climate data. We're basically putting Earth's climate record on an immutable ledger, and once you have that really nice, clean, standardized climate data, you can bring really strong metrics to all sorts of climate action initiatives and distill those into analyses that are helpful for all sorts of applications. So we give people the tools to build really interesting climate tech products.
Hi everyone, Fred here. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Open Forest Protocol. Happy to be here with you. At Open Forest Protocol, we're building what we call an MRV solution, measurement, reporting, and verification solution for forestation projects and projects linked to forest, to basically provide them the digital tools to do the monitoring themselves, the reporting themselves, and bring that data to a decentralized network of companies checking that data. So if that data is accepted and validated, we'll get to a point where you have a value creation out of that data in the form of carbon credits or other digital environmental assets. Glad to be here.
Awesome. I'm so excited for this conversation. So as we all know, we've gotten a lot of hype with certain things like AI recently. ChatGPT is popular, blockchain, and then dMRV is also up and coming. And there was a recent World Economic Forum white paper entitled Scaling or Blockchain for Scaling Climate Action. So we wanted to have this conversation to see what is the climate tech connection between all of these technologies? How are they benefiting us? How are we as humans making the tech work for us in that way? So the first question I have for all of you is how are we implementing these already into our own individual solutions? And where do you see that going in the future? Just a very broad question, but we can just kind of get into a conversation about it. Whoever wants to kick it off, maybe Anna, if you want to kick it off again for Climate Collective.
Yeah, absolutely. Good question. I have I've spent most of my career working in climate since 2007. It's when I started working on energy efficient cook stoves in sub-Saharan Africa, and has kind of been in lots of different spaces of climate since. At the World Bank, I also learned a lot about digital transformation, and we started seeing how the digital transformation had an impact on society at large. We looked at how 21st century skills and connectivity really transformed sectors like healthcare and commerce and education and obviously industry with the IoT and Internet of Things and similar. So this digital revolution, I would say, has been happening for quite a while and has improved a lot of the efficiencies and the outcomes of a lot of sectors. We've not quite seen the same in climate or environment for lots of different reasons. We don't have time to dive into all of them today, but this just hasn't been the case. So I think what I'm really excited about currently is this kind of new realization of the value and the opportunity of digital technologies and this digital transformation that we know needs to come to climate and environment. I can talk a bit more about the white paper in a little bit, but just kind of as a teaser, I think we have a massive funding gap in order to adequately address climate. So how are we going to scale climate finance? I think in 2021, it was something like $600 billion, roughly half from public, half from private. How are we going to scale that into multiple $1 trillion? I mean, we can't do that without knowing better what we should invest in, make investments decision more efficient, more transparent, building more public trust and interest in the notion around climate, the impact these investments are having, and kind of the credibility of net zero and decarbonization pledges that the private sector are driving. So all of this needs digital transformation. It all needs digital technology. We need to have credible, solid data. So yeah, just as a starting teaser, we really need this. We need it fast. And there are lots of really great and responsible companies working to address this, 2 of them here. So really excited to be here.
Definitely. I see, Fred, you're unmuted. Do you have any thoughts on the topic?
Yeah, I think it's a very nice intro. Thanks, Anna. I think from my perspective, coming from a more scientific angle, I think, and from a consulting background too, I think capturing data from nature is kind of what Anna was referring to as the digital transformation, where we need to capture more data from nature. Why? Because basically we need to understand it better. And if we want to value something, we basically have to understand it to value it. So I'm coming from that angle with this reflection on, okay, let's do it, but let's do it well, and let's do it differently. Because the actual system, especially in capturing data from nature, is very much still a very manual process in many spaces. And I think digitalization is very needed to actually address this issue. And obviously, it's one of the things we do, and we've been building on from the start with Open Forest Protocol. And I'm pretty sure dClimate has, even a better solution looking at massive data.
Yeah, I mean, to just kind of go off both Anna's and Fred's points, I think climate tech is at a very interesting stage right now, where it is starting to become a business that has kind of 2 sides. There's a hardware approach to climate, and companies are working on devices that can pull carbon out of the air, or new types of manufacturing that's carbon neutral or carbon negative. And then you have this whole world of software. And for dClimate, that's really where we operate, this software world. And so for us, what's very important is what Fred talked about, having hard data to track how climate action is actually having an impact, right? So we have all sorts of institutions, we have all sorts of governments making pledges. Can we put numbers behind what has been successful, what has not been successful, and how do we kind of sift from just general marketing into accountable results? And so climate tech itself is very broad, but if you look at something like the carbon markets, blockchain can play a very large role in that, because the fundamental tools of blockchain, the transparency and the scale and the group ownership that it brings to a problem is very important. And I know cryptocurrencies these days are a very loaded term, but cryptocurrencies and blockchain go hand in hand. And so where do cryptocurrencies become relevant? Well, they're incentivization mechanisms. The two work together to help align parties for ideally a long-term upkeep goal.
Yeah, so I'm hearing a lot about data and transparency and the importance of that. I'm wondering, based on new technologies like AI and like blockchain, how are we funneling more capital into projects on the ground through the power of their data? I think that's a big question of taking this technology and its real world impact, and what does that look like when we talk about these things on a virtual panel, but we are really using these things in real life. So whoever wants to kind of kick that off with an initial idea, I'd love to hear more about that.
Well, I could throw one concept out there. I think, for example, it's fairly clear that in order to decarbonize, we have lots of different pathways, right? A lot of companies are committing to Science-Based Target Initiative, net zero claims. and starting to decarbonize their own value chains, avoid emissions, or replace practices that are very heavy and intensive in pollution. The reality is there will always be hard to emit sectors and practices that will be really difficult for any one company internally to address. So a lot of groups are looking at either compliance or voluntary claims, and essentially acquiring carbon credits where an action has happened somewhere else that has either avoided emissions or reduced or even actually captured emissions and restored emissions back into nature's or other geological processes. And then a company can essentially purchase that product as a carbon credit and undertake something that's called offsetting. So internally a process to offset its hard to abate emissions in its own value chain with that action that someone else did. And that's sort of, that claim is validated through this carbon credit. So for those of you who are new to the voluntary carbon market, it's very complex. It's actually very complicated and not so useful to kind of summarize it quickly, but I'm doing my best here. It's very interesting, though, super interesting financial mechanism to try to channel more funding to climate. So we now have this process where you can do that. Why does blockchain help in strengthening that process or potentially channeling more funding to those type of commitments, as you asked? In lots of different ways. I think both Osho and Fred are eloquently describing how digital MRV, so the process of monitoring, reporting, and verifying these actual actions on the ground and their climate claim or their environmental claim, how you need data to track that and verify. But I think beyond that, there are also values where blockchain can play a role. For example, if you have a company that makes a net zero pledge, you would ideally like them to report on this transparently, right? So you want them to be able to demonstrate in a credible way that here is our own assessment of our net zero roadmap, and here are the actions that we're undertaking internally throughout our own value chain, or that we are insetting or doing with partners throughout kind of upstream or downstream activities. And then here is the amount of emissions that we don't believe we can meaningfully address at the moment, and therefore we will purchase carbon credits to compensate for those. And this credible reporting is really important because you probably have noticed in media recently that there are a lot of questions around corporations and their net zero claims. Is it all greenwashing? Are they actually doing what they tell people they do? Personally, I would say that any company that, or from what I've learned, or from what I've observed throughout the years, any company that has a net zero pledge is much more likely to have meaningful positive impact on the climate than someone who hasn't. So I don't really love that we're chasing down all these corporates and saying, well, you said you did 500, but it looks like it's only 450. Shame on you. Like, we should really say shame on whoever that doesn't even make a pledge or doesn't engage at all in carbon markets. That said, I do think that it's important for corporates to have transparent reporting. And that's, again, where blockchain comes in. I think there's another feature around sort of community impacts and benefits where blockchain is just a great tool, a very useful decentralized tool that can help to incentivize lots of different actors as part of this value chain, including smallholder farmers or maybe custodians of high value biodiversity areas, where using blockchain you can essentially use borderless payments and make sure that some sort of compensation or a fair compensation for the biodiversity value that they protect actually reaches these communities. So a little bit all over, but I'm ping-ponging it back to Fred or Osho for them to dive deeper into the data piece.
Yeah, I think the carbon accounting and reporting piece is essential. Whereas when we discuss with companies, we see that most of them have the intention or they have already implemented some sort of carbon accounting and reporting, which is great. The question is how precise it is and how far do you want to go and how transparent you want to be about it. So I think it's a whole space that is evolving super rapidly, and it's very hard to navigate what is the good strategy for your own company. Coming back to what I think is essential is if you want to communicate something, you have to be transparent about it. So I think moving forward, if we want to address this climate issue as a whole, and not only offsetting or insetting or philanthropic support and reporting, whatever the angle you have, I think it's super important to be transparent about it, because even though you might have a problem somewhere, in our case, we might have a forest project that is going to burn down. Fine. I mean, not fine, but fine if it's transparent. We need to know what's happening. And I think that's what people are expecting now. We need to be working together on this transparency issue. And in our case, I think coming back to how companies could engage and relate to what we do with this transparency aspect, I think either if it's a philanthropic money going to a conservation project, or if it's a company wanting to offset, or if it's a company wanting to use the solution for insetting, basically trying to reduce their emission throughout the supply chain, doing agroforestry, for instance, I think we all believe that it has to be done very openly and with data in the background. I think that's super important. So I'm kind of repeating myself, but it's basically what we have built, a system where blockchain brings that transparency forward.
Yeah, and on top of the transparency, there is the question of scale and impact. And so I think Anna shared some really key points about how the carbon market works. And as she mentioned, it's really complicated, and it's hard to give a quick summary, but I think she did a great job of that. And one thing that's kind of limiting the carbon market as a form of climate action is that while it's very well-meaning, it was built for a much smaller scale, right? So some institutions were buying offsets and using that to limit their carbon footprint as a means of it's basically just some kind of clever accounting in that sense, right? But now with all these pledges, you have so much capital on the sidelines that wants to enter the market. The demand is far outpacing the supply. And one of the issues with the supply side is that it is still relying on a lot of manual techniques to get carbon, essentially, like the supply, onto a marketplace. It takes a long time. It's very expensive. It's hard for smaller landholders that have high quality carbon to get on there. And then there's all sorts of questions around the quality of carbon and then what the actual impact of buying a carbon offset actually is. So if Microsoft or any other company buys a carbon offset in a part of the world, what difference has that made on the ground, right? Or is this just some sort of clever accounting? And so you have all these questions circling around, and where blockchain, AI, and some of the more kind of advanced cutting edge technologies can really help is by alleviating some of those supply pressures, right? So at dClimate, one of our focuses with dMRV is how do we get sequestration numbers and forecasts for deforestation, things like that. How do we get that done faster and cheaper so that a client doesn't have to wait years and pay a lot of money to understand how much carbon they have and possibly monetize it down the line? How do we set a baseline? And I think that's really important when it comes to carbon accounting, and tracking those baselines in an immutable ledger is also very important, right? So if you have something like Yellowstone National Park, an area that maybe, for the purpose of this conversation, let's say it is not threatened at all by deforestation or land rights, things like that. That carbon baseline, as it changes, has less value in some ways than helping an area where there's active deforestation and limiting that. To me, I think both are good things. We should preserve as much as possible, right? But by being able to set these baselines, you can bring concrete metrics and start to understand the impact of what all the work is.
Yeah, those are amazing real life examples. And I'm really seeing a connection between the dMRV for sure and the blockchain. Let's dive into AI, the hottest of the hot topics these days, right? I know that dClimate is doing some stuff with AI. And Anna, I know that you actually wrote a post on LinkedIn I saw this morning about AI. So I want to hear your thoughts. And then Fred, if you have any thoughts about AI as it's impacting trajectories, I'd love to hear that. But yeah, dClimate, start us off.
Yeah, so AI is interesting because like wherever you have large amounts of data, you're going to run into some sort of machine learning or deep learning system to help you make heads or tails of it and help you get insights from it. So that's kind of like a core fundamental property as to why we're even engaging with this technology to begin with. So in the case of dMRV, if I go back to what I was saying earlier about, how do we make this cheaper? How do we make it faster? Well, there's so much satellite imagery. Just from even government agencies, right? How do we use that satellite imagery to understand what's going on in terms of deforestation and this idea of setting carbon baselines and even forecasting deforestation? That becomes a very interesting problem because now you can pick out areas that are under greater threats than other areas, right? Which again feeds that baseline problem. So it's all interrelated. So with satellite imagery, one really easy way to get started is computer vision. So a computer can look at how forest cover has changed over time. And then you can get into a much more complicated process, which is the generative AI side of things, which is how do we understand what should be happening versus what's actually happening, and that difference, how do we calculate that difference? So that sounds very abstract, but put it simply, you can teach a computer what a forest is supposed to look like tree by tree, and then you can show it what it actually looks like, and it can figure out that something has either gone wrong or something has gone very right? So it's really nice because you can compound these technologies on top of each other. So you start with something simple like computer vision, now you start adding generative AI, and who knows what you can go on from there. I kind of know because I work on this, which is now you start implementing better imagery, right? So we talked about satellite imagery. Well, what if you have synthetic aperture radar? Now you can remove all the troubles that you have from clouds in your images. That improves your estimations to begin with. You can start getting drone-based imagery, LiDAR imagery for actual measurements above the tree cover. So what we're seeing in the dMRV world that I find fascinating as someone who's into technology and has that like kind of quantitative background of building algorithms is that we are seeing kind of the first generation of this tech, and it's really good already. And so it's very exciting about where this will go going forward. Now, one caveat I have to that is in order to make it better, it's not just imagery. We need better on-the-ground measurements. And if we can have trusted on-the-ground measurements, then we can tell a model that this is what's actually going on, and it can better fit the data going forward. So that's like a big area that we use AI. More generally speaking, when you're dealing with climate data, while there's a lot of it and it is very granular, you run into all sorts of problems around forecasting, missing data points, things like that. And AI is applicable in all of those. So I like to talk about these because it's not that dClimate has taken up AI as a way to, kind of just do stuff. It's that when you're working with a lot of data, you're going to need to do it.
Awesome. All right, I can go next. So I think, I wonder just making sure that kind of our audience is tracking along with what we're talking about. So just super high level, blockchain, as we talked about just before, is very, very high level, a distributed ledger technology that essentially allows for more secure and transparent and particularly important tamper-proof transactions or data processes. And then AI is more of a branch of computer science that deals with creation of kind of intelligent agents or models. And these are systems that can reason, learn, or even act potentially autonomously. And using AI for like decarbonization, like climate actions, is not completely new. It's something that's been going on for a while. In fact, I dug out yesterday a white paper I wrote in 2017 on how we can use predictive and prescriptive analytics for like fast tracking renewable energy efficiency, and scaling energy access, which are all like very relevant and within the kind of the climate change realm. So I'll find a way to share that link too. But when we really talk about how AI and blockchain interact, which I think is super, super interesting, I think a couple of things pop out. One for me is we want to know authentically who or what is behind a transaction or behind an action. With the proliferation of generative AI right now, with Google Bard or ChatGPT, anyone can essentially ask that chatbot something, and out pops a article or a statement or an opinion that may or may not be accurate, first of all, and is really only based on the best data that model has been fed and trained on. And then you can share that article as if it would be facts. I think in the future, we will see autonomous agents or bots that will do that without me as Anna going to Google Bard and kind of looking for an article and sending it out. In the same way that we will have autonomous agents that will collect digital MRV data, or will be collecting solar power outputs of panels, for example, and feeding that into a smart meter that then will go and be sort of the baseline for renewable energy credit. So there will be a lot of autonomous actions happening. And one area where I'm really hopeful that these two technologies will be able to play together is in the verifying authenticity of these actions. So with all these, like even today with our ability or with traditional tools, we're not quite able to determine what picture is a deepfake photo and what picture is an authentic photo. I mean, I'm sure you've all seen these videos where some like famous person is talking about something completely random, and you learn later that actually it wasn't that famous person. It was just, you know, a deepfake video. So we need tools to detect and understand what is done by individuals and like authentic agents and what is not. And blockchain can be that sort of water stamp or seal of approval, if you will. So with blockchain, everyone has a unique identity. It doesn't say Anna Lerner and this is where I live, but I have a unique identity on blockchain, and using that as a water stamp to verify that indeed this action came from me, or in the case of, you know, satellite imagery, to be able to plug the identity or the serial number of the camera that took the picture of this specific forest that is being monitored, and then capture that information securely, tamper-proof, on chain, on a blockchain, I think is going to be super important going forward as AI becomes just much more commonplace in our structures. But I'm sure both of you are thinking about this as this is sort of your core business.
Yeah, super aligned with what you said, Anna. I think what we see on our side is that AI is not new in this space, as you said. We have roughly 30 validators checking our data, the data from the Open Forest Protocol, half of them being remote sensing companies. And I'm pretty sure, I haven't checked all the business model, but I'm pretty sure most of them, 90% of them, are using AI in some ways. And they've been using AI for quite a while now. I think what's super interesting in this conversation is that first, AI is not new and it's going to be evolving fast. The question is how it's going to be evolving in our space. And I think that's a very interesting question, because I think if we use it well, it's going to be helping us a lot. And using it well also means, and I'm going back to transparency and to those validators we have onboarded, we don't necessarily know and understand how they use AI today. In most cases, it's a proprietary system, basically kind of a black box. So you don't know exactly, which is normal. It's their business model. So I am hopefully looking into AI to bring more trust and transparency in the system, and hopefully not too many AI systems that would be providing some added value that we might not really understand. Because you can use AI also for, I've seen that lately, people using AI for assessing a project or assessing something that is happening or has happened in the past. If basically you have no good data or no data at all, then the outcome of an AI prospect here is not good. It's not something you should use. So I think we have basically a super good tool. The big question is how we're going to apply it to make it very very relevant and adding value to what we do.
Definitely. And I like how the conversation is really focusing on how these are tools, right? And they're tools. That's what technology is at its core, is a tool that we get to use to our benefit. And so how is that going to continue to benefit the majority and really serve us as we build climate solutions? So I'm going to begin taking some questions as we wrap up. So if anybody has questions, please leave them in the comments, and we'll be more than happy to try and answer them if we can. The first one we have is I am from East Africa. We work with insurance companies insuring farmers and timberers plantation. How can this fit this particular track plantation for insurance? So basically, a question about tracking insurance in the space. And if anyone has any thoughts or wants to answer, take a go at it, feel free.
Yeah, sure. I'll take this question. So, as a bit of background, dClimate came out of the IP of a company called Arbol, which I also helped co-found. And Arbol does parametric insurance on climate events. So basically, in this case, in the plantation case, you can draw a box around your plantation and take out coverage against things like whatever perils a plantation might face. Maybe it's storm winds, maybe it's precipitation, maybe it's heat, and soon it'll be wildfire options and things like that as well. Now, in order to do that, the way we work together is Arbol will utilize dClimate data to essentially settle that contract. So dClimate, in its process of indexing and organizing global climate data, will have a time series on heat, it'll have a time series on wildfire for these specific locations. And if it finds that, okay, heat exceeded a predetermined threshold, there's a no questions asked, no claims process, a immediate payout triggered. So when we were first building this technology, and part of how we ended up putting a lot of this data on chain to begin with, is that we were utilizing Ethereum smart contracts and ERC 721s to kind of develop the tech behind implementing that insurance. So it's a problem that we like solving, and it's a problem that we work on a lot.
Thank you. If anyone has also any thoughts, feel free to share with the next section. If we don't have too many more questions, we can just begin to wrap up with some final thoughts about, what does it look like moving forward in the space after this conversation, and what you guys are looking forward to as we see the climate tech connection become more solid in front of our eyes.
I'll start again. So what I find really exciting here is that there's a space and time right now where ideally every job is in some shape or form a climate job. We all need to change our habits in some shape or form, and we need to significantly change how we go about running our lives here on planet Earth. So that means that everyone's invited. It means that everyone's welcome and everyone has a unique perspective and can contribute something really meaningful to how we do this. On this conversation today, we talked specifically about digital technologies and how they can be applied to scale climate action, which is sort of what we all focus our day-to-day lives on. But there's a lot more within the climate space that is critical and needs to happen. So just first of all, to kind of invite everyone that's listening to engage and to plug into this space. Then specifically trying to say something meaningful about blockchain and AI and climate, I would echo what Osho said earlier. This is super, super early days for both of these technologies. Blockchain is really in its infancy. It allows this unique, decentralized structure that creates transparency, offers coordination, can build in incentives for good behavior, can simplify the way we bring funding to local communities on the ground through direct payments for ecosystem services. It can do so many incredible things. It's revolutionizing the financial sector, trading, real estate, you name it, right? So it is an incredibly powerful technology, which I would argue in the last 3-4 months, I'm talking to a lot of well-established corporations who are embedding this under the hood in their technologies or in their solutions. And it's moving really fast these days. AI in its own turn has been running for quite a while. We've obviously had some major breakthroughs through the last couple of years. I worked closely with the PyTorch team when I was at Facebook, which is also another incredible AI technology and library that has like stepwise changed our ability in the world to kind of do analytics and organize data and create privacy preserving analytics. So this is another massive field. And I think the area where we are interested in kind of as Climate Collective currently is where these intersect, where we can see benefits and opportunities, where they come together and essentially strengthen each other and mitigate the risk of the respective technologies. I think that's really exciting. And we're a nonprofit, so we work a lot with other nonprofit organizations, both building capacity within community organizations, but also working directly with the likes of United Nations or the World Bank to try to bring a private sector perspective to how we can envision an end-to-end digital carbon market, for example, or just unlock climate finance using digital tools. So as a parting word, this is a space that's moving so fast. We really need everyone to jump in and help out. And I think looking closely at organizations like Open Forest Protocol or dClimate that is pioneering these solutions on the ground with actual results, with real people, with real projects, is really the way to go when we think about how to scale this and how to build these solutions.
Yeah, I think my final word here would be reflecting on how fast everything has accelerated in the last years. I jumped into forest regeneration in 2005, wanting to start an NGO back then, and we had no way of interacting at that time. I'm just even thinking about a conference like that, or making meaningful relationship with other organizations, other people. And now it's completely different. Blockchain is not only helping us to connect with other organizations, so working with partners in a meaningful way, because we know eventually blocks will connect, and what we're building here could be used by someone else, and that someone else could use our thoughts, use our technology to build something even greater. That's completely different than just doing your own thing in your own world and trying to scale it up. It's a very, very different game. It's a very different perspective, and it brings a lot of optimism to me if I relate to where I was in 2005 trying to do something on my own. So it brings a lot of energy and positivism, even though the challenge is huge, and obviously not everything is looking great for the planet. I think we have, with technologies like that, and not only blockchain, but the way we think and relate with each other, we have to be optimistic about what we can achieve together, and that's basically my how I see the future, and how I hope we will be able to tackle those challenges in our own niches, not as single entities, but as a group of people, an ecosystem.
Yeah, for me, I think these technologies are really great for all the reasons we discussed. And if I could, just kind of distill it down into one sentence, like transparency and scale. And so, stepping back from that, the question is, well, why are those things particularly important when it comes to climate tech as a whole? To me, if you look at the economic impact of climate events, it's been increasing more and more. And every business, every community is at some sort of existential or very real threat from changing climate trends. And when you have this kind of risk building up and you can associate a dollar value for it, you start developing climate as an asset class. And I think climate as an asset class is a great sort of way to think about it going forward. I spoke with an investor a couple weeks ago, and they said something really interesting to me. It's that they said that they run across a lot of climate tech products, or that they have in the past 4 or 5 years. But as a fiduciary, they found it difficult to make investments because so many of the businesses were kind of more focused as impact driven rather than what they prefer to invest in, which is, how profitable is this business going to be and how quickly. And I think once you start generating climate as an impact class, not only do you attract that kind of capital in because there is a profitability aspect to it, but you start giving businesses, individuals, and even governments the tools to start mitigating the economic impact. And without blockchain, without AI, without hard data behind these, it's very hard to do that. And unless we do that, climate related events will always be seen as it happened, couldn't do anything about it. But that's not the case. We can do something about it, right? So that's, for me, an exciting outcome of what a lot of the work that's being done, both in the blockchain space and then the climate tech space as a whole right now.
Amazing. I'm hearing a lot of positive communal energy from everybody. And yeah, that's the end of our conversation. So thank you guys for your time, for coming, and everyone who joined us on this Friday. This will be recorded and will be posted. So if anyone wants to come back, write some notes, take some quotes, then it will be available to you. But yeah, thank you everybody for your time, and have a lovely weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Much. Bye. Have a great weekend.